Well, welcome everybody. I was just thinking about on the way in today just how many team players we have on this campus. I want to thank Eric Baldwin and his office for filming everything, for all of the tutors for being here and working with our students on a daily basis to help improve their writing. And our guests today are Jennifer Brock from engineering and Sharon LaRue from aviation technology. And it's just so nice to work in an environment where people all come together to help the students learn better. So this is part of, my name's Jackie Kaysen, and I coordinate composition in the English department. And this is part of our What Writing Does series, because we realize a lot of times when people approach a writing assignment in a class, they're just thinking about fulfilling the class requirements and not always thinking about the actual work that writing does beyond. And I remember in talking to Sharon a couple of years ago, you made a remark that it's really amazing that human beings, these symbolic animals, make these marks, and they sometimes even communicate with one another. And writing is so important for so many different things that we do in life. It's not always an end in itself, but a means to connect human beings and get a lot of work done. So we're very happy today to hear from both of our speakers about the work that writing does in their part of the world. So welcome. We'll listen to Jennifer Brock first.
All right. Sorry about that. So I'm Jennifer Brock. I am actually the chair of the mechanical engineering department, and I did produce some PowerPoint slides, so I think I have about 20 minutes is what I was told. Please do feel free to jump in and ask questions if you want to at any point during the presentation. So I actually, what I did when I made up these slides is I took the tech writing lecture that I give to my own students, especially whenever I teach a lab course that involves writing lab reports, and I just cut it way down and changed it a little bit for the audience. But this is a book that for my students who struggle a little bit with tech writing, I found this to be a really nice reference. So if any engineering or technical students ever ask if there's a source where they can learn more about good tech writing, this is a really nice book. It's very easy to read. Types of writing and engineering, there are all types, and obviously manuals, proposals, internal planning documents, white papers, lab reports and journal papers fit the bill, but then there's manuals and websites. Oh, I have websites there twice. And also I remind my students to email. Especially if you're sending email in a professional setting, you really do have to make sure that it's written with correct grammar and syntax, or you will be viewed as less intelligent by your supervisors. I've highlighted proposals and lab reports and journal papers in green because those are the types that I do most often, particularly proposals and journal papers. I actually love to write. One of the things that I like the most about my job is that I get to write all the time. And I really love writing proposals, actually, because and journal papers, because with the lit review, it's like writing a story of, in the whole field of human knowledge, where does my own work fit in? So I really love it. So the key to good tech writing, and this is a quote from that book: audiences read fiction because they want to, and technical prose because they have to. One of the, this is one of the mistakes that especially freshmen sometimes make is they think that they need to be entertaining, and they think that they need to amuse me. When I'm grading a paper, 999 times out of 1,000, you'll just end up irritating me if you try to be entertaining. So people read manuals to learn how to do something. They read reference material to find information. They read these lab reports and journal papers to learn about how something was done and do I understand it and could I duplicate it? So people don't generally sit down with these pieces of writing to do some light reading over the weekend or at the beach. So you've got a captive audience. You do not have to try to entertain anybody, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to try to impress them. So technical writing it's a craft. There's a great deal of pride in doing it really well. So the conventions in tech writing are, no, you're not trying to be entertaining, but you can really impress people by being spare and economical and concise and still manage to tell a story that makes sense. So please don't try to be entertaining, but do try to impress me. So your goal is to deliver the required information as concisely as possible. The only excuse for adding additional verbiage is if it makes it more clear. And if it does, then you should absolutely add that additional verbiage. So the key to developing as a writer and engineer is the same as the key to developing as anything else. You just have to practice all the time. And sometimes we get a lot of people in engineering who maybe they had high mathematical ability in high school. Their guidance counselors told them, oh, you should try engineering. They think, oh, that sounds great because I won't have to write because I hate English class. And they're always really dismayed when I tell them, listen, buddy, we write all the time. Starting at the undergraduate level, we have a lot of lab classes where students are writing lab reports just about every week. And then we have project-based classes where you have to write project reports. So for those of us who go on to grad school, there are theses, journal, and conference papers. A lot of us are expected to help our advisors write grant proposals. So the writing continues to pile on if you eschew grad school or if you go to work in industry at any point. There's the internal planning documents, project proposals, project reports, white papers. And then for academic engineers such as myself, we're always writing grant proposals, journal papers, and project reports. Yes?
What are white papers?
Oh, white paper is, so for example, a white paper that I wrote, I worked for the Department of Energy in West Virginia, and we were starting this project on using plasmas, which is kind of a high energy form of matter, to break down heavy fuels like diesel into lighter fuels that could maybe go into fuel cells. And that was something that a lot of us hadn't worked on before. So I did a really extensive lit search and kind of wrote here's a good introduction to, it's called plasma reforming. Here's a good introduction to plasma reforming. So a white paper is a paper that's meant to introduce a topic. It'll generally include a very extensive lit review, but it's not ever meant to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's just something that you're going to pass around internally. Yeah. So that's the secret about engineering and writing. We do it all the time. And as I said, tech writing, it's got its own conventions. So one of the conventions, and this is something that you have to watch for, adjectives and adverbs. And I include this passage in my presentation. Around the World in 80 Days was my favorite book when I was 12. I literally read the last page and then flipped to the beginning, and I read it through cover to cover 6 times. So, when we're writing prose, we're kind of going for that visual or emotional response, and you do want to make use of adjectives and adverbs and colorful language. In tech writing, we're still trying to tell stories, but we're trying to tell them with precision. Because the thing that engineering and science relies on having a lot of people that can duplicate your results and learn about your results and kind of process them on kind of a more worldwide scale. We need to disseminate our information. So we have to describe what we're doing with precision. So don't let people get away with saying something like this: the video board is extremely fast. How fast is extremely fast? This is a much better way to say it. Ask for specificity, ask for precision. Don't let them get away with saying, I don't know, this ratio needs to be small. Small compared to what? This term needs to be large. Large compared to what? How large is large? So that's one thing to look out for. Another convention of tech writing, again, there are forms of writing where sentences like this would be okay, but in tech writing, the goal is to be brief. And the only excuse for being less brief is if it makes you more clear. So for example, a sentence like this, we're kind of beating around the bush, coming at our idea in a roundabout sort of way. Again, we want to be economical, we want to be elegant, we want to just say what is on our mind directly. So if I read something like this in a lab report or a student paper, I wonder if they're trying to fill space. So short sentences are generally looked upon well in technical writing. So this is one of the things that I actually really love about tech writing. So, we've been, again, we're just telling each other stories. They're just different types of stories. And we've been drawing pictures as long as we've been telling each other stories. Alphabets originally came from pictographs. So, but at some point, in a lot of forms of writing, it's just expected that the graphics are no longer part of the experience. We all remember how proud we were when we graduated from picture books to chapter books when we were kids. But one of the reasons that I think tech writing really deserves some respect as a genre, it's one of those aspects where the figures are expected to be incorporated into the story. So, pay attention to the figures too. They should make sense, they should be referred to in the text, and they should be, they should be well captioned. It should be clear why the figure is there, and it should do something to move the story forward. We make a lot of use of graphs and charts because honestly, this can get across an idea very quickly and efficiently that it would be clunky to try to describe with words. But again, another kind of amateurish thing that especially freshman and sophomore students often do is, whatever figure you're using has to be clear and it has to print well. So if they're using the Microsoft Excel defaults, if the captions are too small to read, point that out because that's absolutely a mistake. Or if you've got these lines that are interfering with the ability to read anything that may or may not be written on the figure itself. And there's nothing wrong with including little captions if they make things written on the figure, if it makes it clearer. Anytime that you have axes, they are almost always going to have units. And the units need to be included in the axis. If numbers without units are completely meaningless, if these axes lack units, they're generally wrong. We typically, for experimental data, the convention is that we use discrete points. Another mistake that a lot of people make is the Excel defaults connect the points with a thick line. Does anybody want to guess why that's not right? Okay, each of these points represents, think about when you're doing an experiment. Each data point actually represents an event. This is something that happened where we did one thing and we got back a result. So to connect these two with a line would imply that we know something about what's going on in here. Technically, we only looked here, 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 and here. So it would be wrong to include that additional lineage because that implies that we know something about what happened in the in-between spaces that we never looked at. The only things that should be written in solid lines are models with mathematical functions. So that's perfectly legit, but for experimental data, discrete points only, and that's a mistake I see all the time. But yeah, again, just the graphics should make sense, and they should fold in with the rest of the story. They're part of the story. Photographs. Everybody knows how to annotate photographs these days. So, if something's not clear, add some captioning or add some additional notation that tells the story more clearly in a photograph. And I stress this all the time. Units are so important. If somebody's giving you a list of numbers and they're not telling you what the units are, those numbers are completely meaningless. So, and there are different ways. As long as it's clear what unit belongs to what column, it's fine. So I've actually become really interested in this idea of writing and engineering education. This is another really amazing, you know what, I was going to look up the what volume it was. I didn't do that, so my citation is incomplete. I apologize, but you do have the year, the author, and the name of the journal. So if you have any interest in looking up this paper, you should be able to. This paper's had a lot of influence on me. It argues very persuasively that writing is something that we do. I just said that we do a lot of it in engineering. We don't do nearly enough. And that's because we spend, we also deal a lot with the language of mathematics. And that's something, I tell my students, it's like special forces training for your brain. You know, we're going to hit you hard with the physics and the chemistry and then all the engineering specialty stuff. We're going to have you do just all these problem sets where you are just grinding through calculations because you need the practice to be able to do that. But we spend so much time grinding through calculations, a lot of times we don't emphasize the aspect of the critical thinking, and we sometimes present the engineering design process as a rational process. It's not. It's engineering problems are indeterminate problems with no true correct solution. And so I've included 2 quotes from this paper, which is loaded with great quotes. The habits developed when writing are thinking comprehensively, expecting to rework the initial results, and realizing that there is no one correct answer. And these are things that we don't emphasize enough if we're just having our students grind through calculations, and writing does emphasize these things. These are all indispensable in educating what's called the reflective practitioner, which is what engineers, as you know, any human professional need to be a reflective practitioner. Writing can provide strong evidence of the presence or absence of mature and creative thought. I've started having my sophomore level students, after they're done grinding through the calculation, I'll ask them a little question, and I'll ask for one sentence on what does this mean. And I'm sometimes fascinated that a lot of the ones who are really good at doing the math can't always tell me why they just did it or what the implications are. And so I'm really coming to believe that we need to be writing more in engineering, not less. So, so I'm actually really pleased that you invited me here today. So one of the things that this is coming back to that, even in my senior level students, a lot of times when they're writing discussion sections on lab reports, they'll do this thing that I call laundry listing. In the discussion, a lot of times there's this mathematical model that we've discussed in class, and now we've done an experiment. For a variety of reasons, the experimental data is never going to match up perfectly with the data that we just took in lab. The data that we just took in lab is not going to match perfectly with the mathematical model. And I ask them to tell me why. And the kind of stage 1 in your developmental process, the ones who are in the laundry listing stage will just list all the things that they could think of that could have possibly affected the experiment, and there will be no discussion about which. So the reason that that's wrong is because that involves no critical thought. I want to know which ones are more likely and why. In the example that I give here, I teach heat transfer lab. I've had students collect experimental data that really strongly agrees with a steady state, what you would expect a steady state model to do. And then the only thing that they can tell me about why the constants that they're calculating don't match the ones in the book are, well, it might have been fluctuations in air temperature. It might have been, but the fact that your data strongly shows that it's not transient, it's not fluctuating, that tells me that probably that's not the main problem. There's probably some steady state phenomenon that's interfering with your calculation and your ability to calculate what you expected. So don't let them get away with laundry listing, please. And then finally, I debated whether or not to, I'm trying to cut this down and think of my audience. I debated whether or not to keep this slide in here. I'm going to put it in just because this is something that has personally shocked me when I see it in lab reports from senior level students. As part of their laundry list, a disturbing number will say, well, it's entirely possible that I screwed up the math. Yeah, in an infinite universe, all things are possible. There's a finite probability of all things happening. But to me, that's a serious sign of intellectual laziness. And if you ever see something like that come across your desk, please don't be afraid to engage the student. Why would you be turning in work that you're telling me might be sloppy? Yeah, your math might be wrong. I've made errors too. We all make errors. That's what the errata sections in journals are for. If this happens, you fix the problem as soon as you find it. You apologize to your client or your boss, or you send a correction to the journal. But don't get into the mindset that this is no big deal and that I can be telling you right off the bat, well, these calculations might be wrong. So That just gets me. Okay. So, in a nutshell, don't feel like you need to be entertaining. You have a captive audience, but just because you're not trying to entertain your audience doesn't mean that you're not trying to impress your audience. Take pride in your craft. This is something that you can do really well. Your first goal is to be clear above all, but your second goal is to be brief. Any questions? Yes?
Is data singular or plural?
It's plural. Did I use it as a singular? I am sorry. I secretly judge my students too, so you got me. When they use data as a singular in their lab reports, I secretly judge them, and then I circle it and I say data is actually plural. Datum is the singular. I can't believe you got me on that one. Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting the way you were characterizing the writing, because I think sometimes with technical writing it is that laundry list or bullet points, but I like the way you characterize it more as a story. It still tells a story. It's not necessarily a fictional story or a story with a primary purpose of entertaining, but it has some structure to explaining things. It has story elements. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
That's why it really bothers me when either when engineers imagine that they won't have to write, or when they treat tech writing as something. This is not the manual in your VCR, right? It is a story. I remember I minored in astronomy, and I remember sitting in this class on stellar evolution, and the professor was deriving going through the derivation of what's called the Chandrasekhar limit, which is the maximum mass at which a star becomes a black hole. I was literally on the edge of my seat. Ooh, look at what happened to the equation of state. Where is this going? These are stories. These are stories. It's a different kind of story, but yeah, characterizing tech writing as dry and using that as an excuse to imagine that it's not important and imagine that a mediocre effort is good enough because it's just tech writing, that gets me, because it's not. It is a craft. This is kind of one of my pet issues, so I'm actually really, really pleased that you invited me here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we may have more questions in relation to both of those. So, yeah, great. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Sherry LaRue, and I've worked with Jackie on some projects in the past. It's always been really fun, so I was also really pleased when she got in touch with me and said, hey, we're doing this. I'm also really pleased because I see a lot of subpar writing come through my department. And I'm not picking on anyone there, kind of a little bit like engineering. Your mind is on something else, and everyone seems to think that the writing is not important. But no matter how good their thoughts are, if they can't communicate them decently, it doesn't matter. That's what I try to get across to them, and they don't understand, well, why do I need to worry about a semicolon? Because you do. Because it makes, for one thing, it makes you look not as intelligent, just like you're saying. When you're going to communicate with others, you have to put that best foot forward. So we've been working on this as a group, trying to figure out ways to improve writing over there. So I was pretty excited. So thanks for having me. I tried to go through and answer the questions that you sent me. So I'll start with what is aviation writing? There's two main types that I've focused on here. There's something I'm going to call bureaucratic, which is code for not very fun and somewhat confusing. And that's going to break down into regulations, which is what we write. We deal a lot of time looking at regulations and trying to get people to understand them. Now, just in the last 6 months, I've actually delved my first time into writing regulations, which is a whole new world for me, and I can't say I'm very good at it yet. But I'm working with a national group, so that's been a whole different look at this for me. So that breaks down, like I said, into regulations, and then something called a standard operating procedure, which is what any facility in aviation has. They have, I don't know if you have it in other places too, an SOP. I'm assuming most technical jobs do. But it breaks down exactly what's going to happen. It is regulatory in nature, but you have to go through and see exactly what each of those things mean. letters of agreement is kind of the same thing. A standard operating procedure is within, like Alaska Airlines would have their own standard operating procedure, but Alaska Airlines and Horizon might have a letter of agreement, the two of them, between the two of them. So we spend a lot of time writing stuff like that. The next category I kind of thought to focus on was commercial writing in aviation. And there is a lot of commercial writing in aviation. Aviation is a big, big business. There is a lot of money in it, and there is a lot of inherent fears tied in with aviation. So they spend a lot of time kind of tuning in on these people's fears about it, and I'll get into that when we get further on. So the commercial, I had originally wrote that this was propaganda, and then I thought that's a little harsh. So we're going to go with it's advertising, but it's trying to sell a product, obviously. And you guys all know what advertising is like, but there's a little bit of a twist with it here, is what I've noticed. And what I notice is I find it a twist, and I've spent a lot of time looking at it. Students don't get that. They go, you know, this is their second or third time reading something, and they go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And they don't really consider where it's coming from. So we'll talk about that. And then primarily designed, like all advertising, to influence a reader. Okay, so those are what I broke down to. I thought I'd focus on bureaucratic first. Bureaucratic is federal air regulations. Everything in aviation has to be regulated. There's a regulation for everything you can possibly think of. You know, when you guys get on the plane and they tell you, you know, to put your seat backs in the right position, that's all regulated. It's all written down in a book somewhere. So when I get students as freshmen, sometimes sophomores, they have to spend a fair amount of time reading these regulations. And they're not always the easiest thing to read. And they're not always easy. They're not hard words, but sometimes figuring out what they actually mean together is hard. So I think I put one on here. Yeah, this is called 91.3. This is the pilots. Do I have any pilots in here? No? That's weird in this state. This is the regulation that all the pilots write or really like. So if you want to hit. It says here, the pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible and is the final authority as the operation of that aircraft. That's pretty straightforward. That means if I'm the pilot, I get to decide what goes. Hit the next one. In an emergency requiring immediate action, the pilot in command may deviate from any rule of this part required to meet the emergency. So that next tells me that I'm going to give you a whole list of rules, but if there's an emergency, you can ignore it. This is why pilots love this. They really do. If you notice in there, you've got the word may. May is a big deal in aviation. They actually have definitions of words, and that's one of them. It means they go into a big definition of what may actually means, which I think most of us probably have an inherent idea, but they put it in there. And the last part says, if somebody does deviate, they shall, which is another big word in aviation. Okay? They have to do this, but only upon request of the administrator, which is another thing that confuses people, send a report. So this is a fairly straightforward one of these. So I don't know how much writing we do on these. What I do with these is we try and understand what they're saying. And one of the things that you brought up is, I get this a lot. I get people who can memorize these things. They can write them word for word. And I'll ask them, I'll say, what does that mean to you? No idea. I'm like, it doesn't matter if you guys memorize it if you don't understand how it works in context with your job. And that's what I spend a lot of time getting them to do. So the properties that I wrote down kind of with this bureaucratic writing is going to be, I have lots of bullet points and they're all unambiguous. Yeah. I think that should be it. Yeah. Unambiguous, that's theoretical. It's funny when you get into these things a lot, students will say, does it really say that? And I'll say, well, yeah, it does. And then I'll go, yeah, you know, you're right. You can look at that a different way. So I think sometimes when the people writing these things are somewhere, they are convinced that they are completely clear in their mind. And they're not thinking of all the different points of view out there from the people reading them. So from a writing point of view, that's something that needs to be considered. Is it really unambiguous? And I would think that you would need someone to go through and look at your writing and say, you know, that can totally be interpreted this way. And just to give you a different point of view. It's always written by the governing agency. In this country, that's the Federal Aviation Administration. In the rest of the world, it's their own aviation, or it's a group called ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization. They do a lot of the oceanic stuff, but it's always going to be written by the agency that's in control of that area. For that reason, it's going to be very bureaucratic, a lot of what you just read. It's imperative in nature, which means it's telling you what to do, okay? It's not a suggestion, although may kind of falls into that once in a while. But for the most part, this is a list of rules. Does it sound a little harsh? Yeah, it does sound harsh. It's telling you how things are going to work in the system. It's not a suggestion. It's not a, wow, what if we thought of it this way? No, it's this way. And like I said before, it's regulatory. The key with this is that legal actions can actually result from this stuff if they're not followed, okay? Now, what that means is you have this whole list of FARs, and if I'm just a little guy in my little plane, I want to fly around, I'm supposed to know the ones that affect me. Sometimes I might forget one. Sometimes I might make a small mistake. Am I going to go to jail? No. No, for the most part. The legal action there that might result is they might take away your license for a while or something like that. There are other ones that if I'm a pilot of a big aircraft and I go have a couple drinks before I get on and fly, that's actually going to be written in these regulations, and then there's a set in the Department of Justice that they can elevate that to legal action. So all this stuff can actually become legal action. You can go to jail if you don't understand this stuff, which is why it really matters if it's written well. And a lot of people don't seem to think it matters that much how well it's written, but it really does. Okay? The other one is commercial. Again, this is going to be persuasive writing. It's generally written by a vendor or a product creator, okay? Most of the stuff, like I said before, aviation is big business. There's big money in it. And there's a lot of people selling things that are designed to make aircraft more efficient, more pleasant, although if any of us have flown lately, it's not the most pleasant experience, but they're supposed to be getting better. And the big one is safety. And what you were saying kind of reminded me of what I'm going to talk about with that too. So they're designed to influence customers that they need a new product, okay? If I'm a little guy up here, like I said, flying off Merrill, they're going to tell me I absolutely need this thing or I could get lost in the mountains forever, you know? And they're going to convince me that this is totally going to change that. Maybe, maybe not. And this is where I'm going to say it relies heavily on the safety aspect of things. And what they do, what I mean by that is you were saying earlier, sometimes people like to put in graphs and show their cool graph, and they like to show all this stuff. And what they like to say in aviation is for safety. And that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about tutoring. A lot of times that's the go-to answer. Do they really know how it makes anything safer? No, not at all with my students. They just go, well, I read this, and it said for safety. So, and I think what this is doing, and I've spent a lot of time looking at this because I have a lot of students write stuff, and I think they have very good intentions, and they turn in a paper and they said, I found this great research, and it says it's going to save everything and make it all better. And then I'm thinking, okay, but that's written by the person who's trying to sell you the product, who's trying to make everything better. So you guys need to consider that. And another, like I said, they like to just say safety. They like to throw safety around, and there's a reason for that, and that'll come up later. The other thing it's trying to do is influence the government to require a certain product, okay? If I'm successful at the second part, I really don't have to care about that first part. If the government says they absolutely have to have this product to be safer, they can say to the aircraft owners, you need to have this product. And then they don't have to worry about influencing the aircraft owners to buy it, right? Because the government already told them, hey, you have to have it. So they spend a lot of time influencing the government that this is going to change everything. Sometimes it has. They had a thing about 10 years ago that came in and basically, without doing anything except changing a few rules and requiring some new equipment, doubled our amount of airspace in the United States, which was really cool. I mean, it helped a lot because the skies are pretty crowded. Now, that one was a good one, and it required a lot of expensive equipment to be bought by the airlines. So they didn't have to worry on this one about influencing the customers. They only had to worry about influencing the regulating agency. Again, they're going to bring up safety. What's funny about that is when you're also looking at other influencing factors, There's a lot of things that influence not just safety. You're going to look at efficiency. Gas savings is huge for aviation. It's an expensive hobby. It's a very expensive endeavor to be involved in. All that type of stuff is equally important. But students tend, especially younger students, tend to fall back on safety, 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 because it's something that kind of hits in our psyche that we need to be concerned with this. So, and that's what I said right there. So this is a typical example of what I'd see on a paper. I think this is from one of my papers, or from a paper a student turned in last semester. As the industry falls further behind in equipping the GA flight for 2020 ADS Bravo mandate, blah, 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 blah. It starts out with an assumption right there at the beginning. Do you guys see it? As the industry falls further behind. Says who? Same thing you're saying. You can't just make platitudes like that. And my students will read this and they'll get very excited about the fact that they've found something that's going to save the world. And I'm like, well, look this is from the people who are. L3 Aviation Products officially launched Lynx Multilink, okay? So that's kind of what when I was thinking about this, what I thought we should focus on is source a little bit. So they do a lot of stuff like that. They'll throw in facts, and they'll throw in a lot of big numbers and big names, and then they'll throw in that we're falling further behind. And everything else looks pretty official, doesn't it? I mean, look at that. L3 Aviation Products officially launched, you know? So I understand, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this critically, why you would think that that was super important. Okay, next one. This is one where they'd have the regulatory tie-in. This is super long. And again, this is something I got in a paper earlier this year. Managed by Lexa Capital Partners, I'm in the middle there. The Next Gen GA Fund is a public-private partnership formed under Section 221 of the FAA Reauthorization and Reform Act. Okay? So what they're telling you here to try and sell something is the federal government is going to require this, so you need to be on board with it now. That's what they're telling you here. Again, this is from a vendor. Okay? This is from somebody selling something. I don't have a problem with people selling things. That's what all advertising is, and we need to do it. I mean, everybody needs to do it. They have to have a market for their product. A lot of this stuff kind of moves a little bit beyond that in that it indicates something that isn't quite true yet. Like this says to me that they're going to require this. Well, no, they're really not. I looked it up. It's not required. It was suggested. It might be required someday, but it's not there yet. So those are just some. And some of the things. Going back to the safety thing, for you guys working here trying to help people if they come through with aviation products, you can click on, it's way overused. I get a lot of students. I've even gotten to the point where I do a mostly short answer on my tests. If they write safety, it's wrong, unless they can explain why. Because I get a lot of answers, well, why do we do this? For safety. Okay. You know, I don't quite understand that. I mean, you could say I wash fruit for that reason. I mean, I can do a lot of things for safety. So they use it a lot. Are they wrong? No. We are doing a lot of this stuff. It's a very industry that ties into the psyche that it needs to be safe. And I think all of us, you know, we've all been on planes. Everyone up here travels a lot. We want the plane to be safe. We want it to have TV. We want it to have internet. But we just assume it's safe. So we like to throw that in there. Go ahead. And this is why. It very much, and I see a lot of aviation writing that does this, and I see a lot of students totally influenced by this. They're scared of stuff. They go, well, we have to have this or it'll be bad. And then what happens is the people who are doing the writing go and they push that out to the general public and they'll say, hey, we got these new planes equipped with this stuff, you know, and it's supposed to be much safer. And quite honestly, there's a lot of industries I don't know anything about. And if I hear safety, like with food safety, I'm go, ooh, this is safer. I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy the fruit wash. You know what I mean? So there tends to be a lot of that. I'm not saying it's just in aviation, but I think in potentially any field that has a safety aspect or regulatory tie-in, it's going to be a factor. And like I said, most people will generally agree to something for that reason, partially because they don't understand it, and nobody wants to be against aviation safety, right? No, really, I don't want that. No, nobody wants to say that, including regulators. For this reason, sometimes they get sources, and they'll hand me sources as actual fact, and it's not fact. So for that reason, I have really been focusing on source, and I know there's been kind of a movement with a few of the other people I work with to focus on the source. So when they come in here, if you guys can help them, I know you're designed primarily, I'm assuming you're designed primarily for some of the stuff. I was listening to Sarah earlier, that was kind of fun. And, but focusing on the source will help them a lot. And in fact, that's more important to me and to most of my colleagues right now than, I mean, certainly we want people to know how to use a semicolon. That would be huge, believe me, you know, and not write a run-on sentence. But source material is also really important. And my development as a writer, you kind of mentioned that. I have a BA in English and a master's in adult education. So this was a total switch for me, if you want to click again. The writing in aviation is a lot less stylistic. They don't care. But you were saying earlier, they do care. It is more pleasant to read. And you're going to get further. Even so, when you get students that say, well, I don't have to know that. I'm writing for aviation. I just have to be straightforward and tell people things. No, it's still, the way they present is still going to be a factor, okay? The persuasive writing, going back to persuasive or advertising, the other type of writing they may delve into as they get further along in this process, they actually will begin to write some type of regulations. And we're moving to that. I'm finally moving to that now. A couple of my colleagues are too. And that's a whole different style of writing, believe me. And it goes back to some of the unambiguous stuff and the imperative stuff and trying to figure out how to write that. I think that's further along than most of the people you guys are going to see. Most of them are at the beginning of the process. And that's congressional. For student writing, honestly, this would be the biggest thing to me if you guys would persuade them that not the first hit on Google is maybe not their best source, okay? You know, not that you would know this, but when they copy something, the first hit on Google is not their best source either. I've actually had people turn in papers, and I'm like, you copied the first hit on Google. I can even go look that up. But not most of them aren't doing that. But most of them find a source, and they're not thinking about their source critically at all. They're going with, I found this on the internet, so it must be true. I know this is across the disciplines. They're trying to talk to people about source and critical evaluation of information, but that would be huge. It would really help. So if you had a student come in and say, well, is this really, you know, what source did you use here? Did you use more than one source? And sometimes they'll use 2 or 3 from the same company. I'm like, okay, that's really, I understand it's technically 3 sources, but it's going to have the same point of view. So source is a big one. Right now, that's kind of more important, at least to me, and analyzing that. Generally, I think the writing will come. They do have to work on it, and it made me laugh, too, when you were saying, well, I'm going into engineering because I don't like to write. I'm going into aviation because I don't like writing or math. I get both. Not entirely, obviously, there's engineering and aviation, too, but they get really annoyed that they have to write and are expected to write, and I try and tell them they're going to have to write. One of my favorite stories is I had the NTSB come in and talk about accident investigations, which is a very cool thing. They give me pictures. And my students had sent him questions, and the first thing he did, and I don't edit them, and I told them that, I'm sending him to the inspector, is he said, none of you could ever work for the NTSB if you write like this. And he showed us how many reports he writes. He's like, you have to know all this technical stuff, but you have to be able to communicate it. So just thinking I'm going to struggle my way through with my D in English 212 and be effective is not a good strategy for most of them. Clarity and facts are important. Obviously, we're not doing a stylistic writing. I'm not writing about how I feel about an airplane. That would be nice. It'd be a poem. But that's not what I'm looking for. And like I say, my students are actually, it's like a forbidden word on my tests. Because I see it all the time, I finally say, I'm done with it. You guys have to have a reason for this stuff. And they try and get around it. Sometimes, and I don't know if you see this, but sometimes I think if they just put enough words, they think if they put enough words down, the right ones will be in there somewhere. And I'm like, no, you have to tell me what you want. So There might well be a reason, and it probably is safety related. Most of the things we do are safety related, which is part of the reason you can't just say that. So tell me the reason it's safety related. That's fine. We do it for these reasons, which increases safety. That's fine, but don't just say I do it for safety, okay? Actual facts are better than grandiose claims. I think that falls across all disciplines, but certainly with, this is another one. This will decrease accidents by 90%. Really? That's amazing. Do you have any fact? No. So, but they read it in an advertising thing. So that goes back to source. And I think I'm done. Questions, you guys? None? Wow. Thanks.
I just thought I would have never known. I was interested in just how much the writing done in the field of aviation is influenced by writing done in the legal field. You know, just so many things there, and I think it's probably because the Transportation Safety Board comes in and evaluates accidents, and there's all this regulatory language. But you can see how, you know, it's interesting to see how two fields come together, and when they're communicating with each other, they each take on a little bit of the other's characteristics.
Yeah, and that's frustrating to a lot of pilots. You know, because I understand piloting is a hobby up here. People do it for a fun weekend trip, and they don't want to deal with that. So they actually break that down. They break it down into basically Part 91 is easy stuff, and then they have more and more stringent regulations as it gets further and further. Alaska Airlines, I probably couldn't even understand myself what all their rules are. Yeah, they do overlap a lot, and it's interesting that if you break this rule, even though it's just a rule made by some agency who's not lawyers, it can elevate to breaking a law. I mean, there's legal consequences. People go to jail, so you got to understand them. Okay. Anything else? Sarah.
I have a question for both of you.
Yeah, I don't, Jennifer, maybe you want to go back up and join and.
So I'd like to know how you understand the difference between good and well. No, just. My question for you, actually this is the first time we've dealt with sentence level rights interviews. You work a lot with bigger issues and source usage, et cetera. So it was good to hear from both of you about that. But my question is for each of you is how much writing do you require from your students in the, I think, the course maybe that you teach? And what is that kind of writing that you're asking them to produce for the class besides a short answer type of thing on a test? So beyond that, a test taking quick answer, short answer, what type of writing do you require?
Well,
Assignments.
I start out with the little beginning classes, my freshman classes. I have a big thing on what's the next issue that's going to affect you. And a big part of the paper is the source. They have to send me the source. We're going to talk about the source. So we walk them through that process as a freshman as they move into, I have some associates and some bachelor students. As they move higher up in the associates and into the bachelors, they become much more, how can you affect something like this? Much more, I think the one class I have has 7 5-page essays. I don't know what that is. But hopefully that beginning stuff is going to help them when they move on to the further stuff with the idea of the source. That's kind of how I've set up my classes. I don't know about you.
The big thing in engineering is lab reports. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm really starting to think that we don't require it enough, and I'm actually interested to start introducing more writing in my lower level classes. But as of right now, it's really only at the 300 level that engineers even get into lab classes that require lab reports. Those are generally kind of a once a week deal. I think our program requires 4 or 5 lab courses at the 300 and 400 level to graduate. And then sometimes for the advanced elective students, I have them sometimes do like a lit review where I'll ask them to pick a topic of interest to them, and then I'm looking for, you know, again, in the whole realm of human knowledge on this particular problem, what's going on with different groups, you know, what innovations are coming out of where is this going, and then that would lead into, at the graduate level, if you're going to be doing a project, how does your project contribute?
I would imagine imagine that a number of documents that are produced in either engineering or aviation end up going through the hands of many people. So I was just curious, I was thinking manuals, all those publications are usually not put out just by individuals. So I don't know how often students in your classes are writing together in groups collaboratively and working on the same kinds of documents together.
Well, I don't teach this class, but the capstone class for aviation, 492, I think it's normally 492 across the university. Their whole thing is they get together and they put the class on one big project. And it's a whole semester long project. And by the end of that, they produce about a 20 to 30 page paper and about an hour long presentation that they give to the community each year. This year it was on drones, UAVs, and how to implement them into the system. So, and they give them each their own topic, and they each write their own paper, and then they try, somebody has the task of bringing all those papers together, which I don't envy them that task. So it's not in my class, but it is taught. I don't know what.
We have the same thing for our students have to do capstone, and it's a paper and a presentation of about equal length. There are a lot of the labs where the lab reports are done in groups, although ability to work in teams is really important for engineers, but that's as much to avoid having to grade. Like our fluid dynamics class, we teach that to 60 students in the fall. So, grading 60 lab reports every week on top of everything else that faculty member has to do would really be very time consuming. I've still been able to keep my lab reports individual in my classes. I feel like that's important just because I'm scared to death that somebody's going to slide by, not having to do any writing. But there's a little collaborative lab reports.
Yeah, I think that free writer problem is always out there. But I don't know, maybe some of the tutors in the room, have you guys had groups come in? Because I'm asking that also knowing our 212 curriculum in the Department of English, the technical writing, which it sounds like your programs require. A lot of the projects in there have a team-based element to them, especially the larger projects, maybe a feasibility study or something along those lines. So I don't know if groups come in here together and work with the tutors.
Yeah, mostly English 111, because I know that class requires a group and paper.
Yeah, and 212 and 111 comes through a lot.
To be fair, at the professional level, all of the journal papers that I've published have been, collaborative with a team.
I think most are in aviation too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you guys. Do you see a lot of engineering students?
Maybe.
You see a lot of engineering majors, but they usually come in with their English class coursework, and then sometimes with their engineering stuff. There have been times when someone in your end of the world has required them to write up, I'm sure there's a more technical term, but to kind of write up a step-by-step how you would go about constructing something. And sometimes it's as simple as like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that they have to write it very technically how they would create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and they've brought those things through before.
So could I ask you guys for some feedback on how, how we might encourage more students to come to you? I don't know if it's annoying when instructors make it a requirement that you have to turn in one of those little gold slips on this paper. I don't know if you consider that more annoying than helpful, but do you guys have any suggestions for how we might filter more of our students your way?
The extra credit definitely helps.
So you're saying offer a little extra credit instead of making it a requirement?
Yeah.
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 Even if it's just like 3 points or something that actually won't affect their grade.
He laughs.
They don't really want to leave anything we have to say.
That's
They
what
want to get
okay.
through it,
Yeah.
but with the extra credit, they're like, we guys should do something.
We also then get swamped with 90 students the day before, so that's why they
Well, that's good advice. Thank you.
So you both kind of mentioned sources and content and analyzing sources. I was wondering, do you have any exercises, or do you do anything to help students analyze those sources or come up with methods for analyzing, or is that kind of something you hope to get?
Well, I have the one assignment, the very first writing assignment I give them when they started my program is, you have to write this paper, and you have to first send me your source up to 5 days ahead of time, and then I will look at your source and we will talk about your source together. That's as much as I do. I guess probably I should do more than one. But, yeah, how about you?
That's a good question, and currently I'm not aware that we do anything of that nature in my program, and we probably should, because it's a very good point. There's a lot that we expect them to get, and we get frustrated when they don't, but you know, maybe it's time to emphasize some of those things a little bit more.
I like that kind of both of you guys touched on this idea that like, if you were writing stuff, you can't just have a bunch of like a bullet point list of like data. Like that doesn't actually tell you anything, it's just a bunch of stuff. And until like you have to be able to fit and analyze that data, and as you're saying, like fit it into the larger context of what do we know like as a field, and how does this like, you know, explain anything? Does it help like fit it, explain other things? You know, does other stuff influence this? But I think sometimes it's hard, you know, when you're just sitting down with someone for like 30 minutes, you know, reading their paper, especially on a topic like, I really don't know anything about aviation or engineering for that matter. You know, like, do you think there's a good way for us to reading a paper that, quite frankly, we might not really understand, to still sort of be thinking about that? Like, I might be able to read both a really good engineering paper that really does analyze the data and make some really great, you know, like conclusions, and I might also read one that is basically just talking about a bunch of, you know, garble and like information and doesn't really analyze it. I'm not really sure that I would do a great job at telling the difference between them, because I might not fully understand either paper.
Actually, I think I've got an answer for that. Maybe I should have done a better job doing examples. If I come back, I'll bring some concrete examples. But I would say that for my part, I don't expect you to judge their analysis, because yeah, you know what? Honestly, even a lot of engineers, the field gets so specialized that a lot of mechanical engineers wouldn't be able to read some of my journal papers, because we're all so hyper specialized, you know. But when you read bad tech writing, you know about it. You can read something that's good science, but it's just presented poorly. So you can still tell, you know, it should still be a compelling narrative. It should still be told in a reasonable order. It shouldn't weirdly swap tenses in the middle of the. I see that all the time. It drives me insane. You know, things should be presented in an order that makes sense. They should be well described. Yeah, you're not going to be able to pick up on the really subtle points of, was this the correct use of this particular equation? But you can absolutely pick up on, is this a well-written piece of analysis, or is this a poorly written piece of analysis?
And one thing I could add, that was really well done, but also transitions.
Oh yeah.
My students, they'll go, this fact, boom, this fact, boom, this fact, boom. How do these facts tie together? If you could work on, it would help a lot in the readability of the paper if you could go, how does this tie into the next one? To have a transition between paragraphs, because that seems to be a lost art, at least with my students. They just throw out a fact. And it might be relevant, but why are you choosing this fact? Probably because it relates to this following facts, but you have to tell me that. I mean, I'm coming from the point of view, and I'm sure you are, where you go, well, I do know how that relates. But they still need to know themselves, and if they don't have a transition, then I don't know that they know. So.
And in that sense, the tutors are a really good resource, because they are, like, if they can understand the paper, at least understand those things, then the student's done a good job. Since they kind of are a good audience to throw the students in front of.
Well, and frankly, too, another thing that, again, this is something that especially young engineers who are feeling really insecure, I probably went through this. I went through this period. Oh yeah. They like to kind of hide behind the jargon and say, oh, that's too technical, I wouldn't be able to explain it to you. If you ever hear that from anybody, it means I'm not comfortable enough. I don't have a deep enough understanding of it myself that I could explain it to you. There are things in my field that I don't feel. I don't know if you guys heard a couple years ago, there were some people who claimed that they got down to absolute zero. And you know what, I had some students ask me about that in my thermodynamics class. I think I could understand that if somebody explained it to me. I used to work in a laser lab. I know that it involved manipulating certain electronic states that the molecules can occupy. So I've got enough background that I think I could understand that well enough to explain it to a group of undergrads, but right now I don't. I don't, I had to tell them I don't have enough knowledge of that experiment that I can adequately explain it to you. I'm sorry. But there are a lot of things that I do feel like I could explain to anybody. So one of the things our students need to practice is explaining technical concepts to non-technical people. So don't be afraid to ask them.
I just had a question related to some of the earlier questions about whether your students come into the Writing Center or not, and I'd be curious with all the tutors in the room which fields you guys come from and whether or not there are any tutors that end up working here from technical fields like engineering or aviation, because I believe the Writing Center recruits tutors from all areas of the campus, right? You don't have to be an English major to be a tutor in the Writing Center. So I thought maybe that's another way to encourage more interaction in different fields too. But
How many of you are non-English majors in this room?
okay, so yeah.
It's a quarter of our consultants.
So maybe even encouraging some of your undergrads who do enjoy writing and seem good at it to maybe get some on-campus work and spend some time here as tutors. Jason, I don't know if you were going to say something too.
Yeah, it was kind of goes off of understanding a paper. I was wondering if you discuss audience with your students when they're writing a paper, who they're writing the paper for. Because that, I know that can kind of, if we know who their audience is, sometimes that can help us understand what it is they're trying to say.
That's the one thing that I've been asked so far that I feel pretty good saying engineering actually does very well. Well, because we've got a lot of jargon, and we're constantly telling them, you have to know your audience, because there's a really big difference between presenting to a group of engineers where you can use these terms without defining them, or presenting to a group of engineers in a different field, or non-engineers.
I don't think we do. That's a good question. Something to think about.
I have a question about the white papers, which I thought was interesting. I've only thought about them in terms of the field of education, usually. Is a white paper usually for an audience that is within your field? Or is it for people to explain things outside of your field? Or could it be either?
I guess there's no reason why it couldn't be either. I think
To inform people about an area that you're in, to
right.
give a background for something.
And it's the designation just means it's not something that's intended to go through the peer review process. So I guess maybe the term white paper maybe flags it as, here's something that we've created to introduce this topic. Understand this was never meant to go through peer review, because obviously that's a whole nother level of
I guess I find that the idea of a white paper might be interesting for students to actually write one in a course, in a technical course, because then they develop the background to explain it to another person, to introduce ideas, and that might be something to think about as a way of framing in a course. Getting those students to learn some things and explaining that to others before they just go into technical aspects of.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really good idea.
And more work for you to read.
There's something going on campus today. There's a lot of people visiting. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? So I would encourage you, both of you and your colleagues, to encourage your students to come to the Writing Center for consultations A really helpful thing for us is that they bring the assignment with them, an assignment sheet, or if you have it on the Blackboard site, because that would be really helpful too, is that they come in and our consultants have a better idea of what the expectations are for that assignment. So that's very helpful also.
Do rubrics help you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a rubric. It might be a paragraph or whatever you've given them in your syllabus or whatever handout you have and say, this is what you have to produce by this date. This is what I'm looking for. So that we have a better idea of what the student's being asked to do. Or you can give us ahead of time examples so that we can keep that on file. Project that you always have them do is really helpful for us, so we can train and look at that and know what's coming. When it does come in, we have a better idea of what you're looking for, what you're looking for. This is helpful, having you explain these things, so I think that's really, really good. Thank you so much. Anything else that would be helpful for you guys working with students from these fields?
I have one question. In your courses, for the assignments to your students, do you ever have, rather than a really structured, like, go get a source about this specific topic and we'll analyze a thing like that, have you ever had any assignments where you kind of say it's a class on thermodynamics and you just let them kind of roam free and pick a topic, either new or old, of thermodynamics and let them do their own independent research with it and try to either write a summary or an argument or anything like that with it? Because I feel that you say in both of the fields it's important to stress that how important writing is. One of the best ways really is to get people really involved in it with their own interests. A lot of times if they have their own freedom to choose what they want to, then it can actually like affect them a lot more than if it just assignments handed to them, like go find something like this. So I was just wondering if you guys have ever done anything like that in your courses.
I have, but only at the senior and first year graduate level. I believe that it would be advantageous to add that at the freshman and sophomore level. I'm kind of looking at doing that next year, but so far I have not.
I do with my upper division class. It's their big last paper. It's about a 10-page paper about their personal goals and what their personal improvements are. So personal role. And they can go wherever they want, but they do have to bring in sources. You know, they can say, I want to do this because I know this will make it better. Why? You know, with a source. So, but only once. It's kind of hard to fit in at that freshman and sophomore level because you're pretty technical in these fields.
We do have so much technicality that we have to, and it's important, you know, and we make them spend so much time practicing it.
Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank you guys very much.